pashmina wool or other products which come from Kashmir, silk carpets or whatever other incredible products, the saffron produced in Kashmir, no? And it's a Kashmirian method, practical and very, very outstanding. Who were the prominent figures or saints associated with Kashmiri Shaivism? It's interesting. This question also takes us into an interesting place, because if any one of you would be knowledgeable in Indology, the general is Tibetanology, Indology, it's the study of Indian culture and spirituality. And that's why, because India is the home of so many religions and so much spirituality, then they prefer to call it generally Indology, because otherwise, if you say Hinduism or Hindu religions, it's a mess. It's Ganapataya, it's Vaishnava, it's Shakta, it's Shaiva, it's what and what. And therefore, they prefer to look at it as Indology. Well, if you know something about Indology, and I ask you to tell 10 big names from Indology, most people who are familiar with Indology and not familiar with Kashmiri Shaivism in particular, they would not mention any of the great masters of Kashmiri Shaivism. Why? Kashmir was extremely difficult to access. There was no direct way to get into Kashmir from India, except through Kulu, Manali, Ladakh, a very roundabout way. Nowadays, there are, of course, airports, and you can fly directly in Kashmir. And with huge efforts, the Indian government has built a tunnel through the mountains, a long, strategic tunnel through the mountains, and therefore now there is a road, a highway, which unites what is south of the mountains with north of the mountains. But in the 10th century and thereabout, Kashmir was on another planet. Even as far as India was concerned, people shrugged their shoulders and they said, how would we get to Kashmir ever? And thus, the great masters of Kashmir were very little known, and their teachings, their metaphysics, was also very little known. And that's why it's easy for me to quote for you 5, 6, 7 names, like Vasugupta, the first one who wrote the Shiva Sutra, then Utpaladeva, Bhattanarayana, and other, Somananda, and other of the great mystics of Kashmiri Shaivism, and then the top levels, Abhinavagupta, the top of the top, his disciple Kshemaraja, probably the second top master of the tradition, and then finishing with the colorful images of Laleshvari in the 12th century, one of the great spiritual women of India, and last but not least, Jayarata, the commentator of the Tantra Loka, a great yogi by himself. But then if you ask Indologists, maybe they have heard about Abhinavagupta. Maybe. So that's why this question is a double-edged question, because it says, who are the prominent figures? In India, when you say Patanjali, when you say Shankaracharya, when you say Chaitanya, when you say, not to mention, of course, Krishna and Rama and so many, Gautama Buddha, of course, and others, the list could continue, Kabir and the medieval figures such as, what's her name, Mirabai, and other such figures. People will say, yeah, I heard about that. Oh, yeah, that's a great figure. When you say the 6 top names of Kashmiri Shaivism, maybe Indologists have heard about the first of them, the top of them. And if you ask normal Indologists who don't go too much into Tantra, yoga and metaphysics, and you ask them, okay, this Abhinavagupta, at least that you heard about, who is he? First thing which most of them will tell you is that he is the top aesthetician of India, is the man who wrote the most mind-blowing and comprehensive treatise on aesthetics, defining what is aesthetic in theater, dance, art, painting like sculpture, visual arts, music, and so on and so forth. So, and then people would be puzzled saying, I'm a disciple. If you tell them, I'm a disciple of Abhinavagupta, like, what? Is Abhinavagupta a yoga guru? Yes, actually, yes, a very, very big one, but people don't realize. So it's again a very good question, because it shows, when you ask it this way, when you ask this question this way, it shows to many people that you know, and at the same time you don't know. There is at least one stream of the Indian tradition which, because it existed in Kashmir, and because Kashmir was virtually unknown and inexistent for the rest of the world, being isolated from north, south, east, and west, a little bit actually communicating with the east in the area which today is called Ladakh, and which is predominantly a Buddhist area, which was more connected spiritually to Tibet than to today's India, then we find out that it's very interesting. So there is a pretty much unknown, rare, secret, vernacular, almost we could use that word, tradition of India, which these people from Agama, Swami Vivekananda Saraswati, they even claim it's the highest, the most amazing, the best of them all. That's pretty thought-provoking, and that's why many people want to know more. And believe me, the people who study Kashmiri Shaivism, they are never disappointed by digging into it and finding out if these statements were right or not. What are the core philosophical principles or teachings of Kashmiri Shaivism? In what way does Kashmiri Shaivism offer a fresh perspective on the nature of reality and existence? Even the elementary concept between Hinduism as a general religion, as one of the top 5 religions of the world, right? Judaism, Christianity, Islam in the West, and Hinduism and Buddhism in the East. These are the 5 top religions of the world, also in terms of followers, in terms of number of their followers. And then there are approximately 10 minor religions like Shintoism, Taoism, Sikhism, and a few others. I'll not bother going into that. That is the kind of thing which you learn in our metaphysical workshop. So, does Kashmiri Shaivism offer a fresh perspective? It's an interesting way in asking, because most of the world religions, they are made in such a way that they address the masses. Kashmiri Shaivism was a bit of a failed experiment from this standpoint, because it went to a level which was too high. When you study what the Hindu Kashmirians, Shaivistic Kashmirians did in the 10th century, in the 12th century, or in the 20th century, you find out that exception made a handful of champions, a handful of wow spiritualists. The others were doing what every other Indian from the rest of India was doing. Kashmirians had the grace of receiving through Vasugupta and Abhinavagupta some teachings which are really top of the top, and they offer the most radical vision, and I would say God's truth as a direct vision of what the reality is. Who are we and what's happening in this universe? But this vision was so much for high intellect and high purity and high spiritual intuition, men and women, that actually the normal population didn't click to it, didn't access to it very well. And thus, in a way, I say it's like a failed experiment. It was, as a military expression in the Second World War said, a bridge too far. It was like overstretching the possibilities of the human beings. If the human beings would have been in Satya Yuga, then Kashmiri Shaivism would have been the right lunch for them. But because the people in Kashmir, even in the 10th century, they were still like us, the rest of the world, part of Kali Yuga, Kashmiri Shaivism worked well for Vasugupta, Abhinavagupta, and, as I said, Kshemaraja. Kashmiri Shaivism occasionally works well for some spiritual seekers, especially those who are honest spiritual seekers, like people who really give it the whole hand. And when it comes to people who have a spirituality at the level of daily religion, like my spirituality is that every Sunday I go to the church. And even there, like it happened in the Catholic world in the 20th century, I consider that spending 2 hours and a half to listen to the Mass once per week on Sundays is bloody too much. And this has forced Vatican to reform even the Christian Mass. And in the 1962, in the Vatican II Council, the Catholic Church has approved a short form of the Mass, a severely cut down form of the Mass, which is 45 minutes max. Like, people don't have patience there to stay more than 45 minutes. And in 45 minutes, they want to go do their thing and take the wafer, take the so-called bread, the so-called body of Christ, and get to the door to go home. Because what do they have to do on Sunday? Business, sex, cheating, lying, egoism, arrogance. They have to do, like, why wouldn't they spend 3 hours in the church? At least once a week. What's so pressing? This is the spirituality of the average people. And for the people who have this kind of spirituality, where 45 minutes per week is a sort of the maximum sacrifice that I can do. And when I have a child, I go and baptize the child. And when my grandmother is dying, I just go and make a funeral service. And it should be as quick as possible and as painless as possible. And that's my relationship to God. Like, let's get rid of God and all these obligations as quick as possible. So I'm not completely against God. I'm not completely irreligious. I'm not completely anti-spiritual. But I have a very limited tolerance to that. For those kinds of people, Kashmiri Shaivism definitely is way too much. Way too much. And because of that, even people who had the pulse, who understood the pulse of the world, like even a Jesus himself and other great teachers, they taught a spirituality which was more friendly. So I'm telling you, very simple. If you will have the curiosity to study 2 weeks of Kashmiri Shaivism with us here in Agama, definitely you will be wowed by it. There is nobody who can say, oh, it's stupid, it's simple, it's banal. Because it's not. It's really, really mind blowing. And when you finish after 2 weeks, you have 20 times more questions than when you started, which is the exact good sign of a good teaching, of a good understanding, of an insight in spirituality. But if you are not, if you are the kind of person who wants to give 45 minutes per week to your spiritual life, then Kashmiri Shaivism might be a bridge too far. It might be a bit too much, and you will study it with pleasure for 2 weeks. And maybe in the third week, you will even want to do the practice, the intensive, the retreat, like, wow, let's do this thing for 1 week, see how it feels. And after that, when you meet with me 1 year later, if I'm asking you how much Kashmiri Shaivism, what do you like most from it? What are you practicing every day? It's like, I didn't really click with it and all that. So we will see how many of you click with Kashmiri Shaivism. In Agama, we have a sort of a natural selection for this. Because the highest truth of Agama, because people ask, what's the nature of your teachings? What are you trying to prove in the end? When people will stay with Agama or with Swami Vivekananda for 12 years, what will they get out of it? What will be their beliefs? What is the kind of accomplishment that you try to give to the world? No, and people want to say, tell me in advance so I know if it's worth it for me. People want to evaluate it, which of course you can understand it in a pragmatic way, but it's exactly like people say, should I become an engineer or should I become a doctor? So describe me the educational system for becoming a medical doctor. How many years and what do I get in the end? And what kind of diploma and what will be my abilities and what will be my paycheck? Why not? And people say, if I want to become an engineer, let's say an electric engineer, how many years? What will I get in the end? What will be my abilities? People are asking pragmatical questions, and I myself like to be a pragmatical person, and I understand and enjoy pragmatical questions. But precisely because people have such questions, like, what's Agama about? What will you discover in the end? No, maybe in the end you are going to be like the Church of Scientology, which tells to people that we are operative thetans coming from the Pleiades and some shit like that. And I would like to know in advance if you are preparing for me such a revelation. And where does this go? Maybe Agama is supposed that we are going to have collective suicide after 12 years of yoga, and so maybe that's the message, like Jim Jones or something. And so, of course, it's normal that people would ask such questions, and that's why we are having here the intro, the Kashmir Shaivism intro. Like, okay, you want to know what's in the advanced stages? We can't teach you, if you want to be an engineer, I can't teach you the equations of Maxwell because that takes differential calculus and other such things. You can't get there very simple. And what I can tell you, I can still tell you approximately the outline of things. That's what KS intro is. It's an appetizer for you to know if ever you want to consider spending 6 years, 10 years with Agama, what will you get? That's what you will get in the highest levels. But before that, when people are coming as beginners, people can't feel their chakras. There are people who, even after 3 years of yoga, they still make confusion among the chakras, and they say, is this Vadhisthana or is this Anahata? No, and then a more advanced yogi tells them, no, can't you see? This is Anahata clearly. And in this way, we are focusing on totally different values and practices in the beginning. But again, because people want to see a bit of the goods which are coming on top of it, that's why Kashmir Shaivism intro is there. And then people usually in Agama, they meet again with teachings of Kashmir Shaivism after minimum, at the highest rate of study in Agama, it takes 4 years to be able to study practical Kashmiri Shaivism. Sometimes more like 5 years, 6 years at the normal rate of study of most people. I'm not telling this to scare you away. I'm telling this just to show to you that Kashmiri Shaivism is having some very powerful promises and it offers a lot of things, but again, people have to select first to see. There has to be a sort of a, how do you say, natural selection, like in the language of Darwin in evolutionism, no, like who goes where and does what. Kashmiri Shaivism is for the people who really want to go deep. It's for the people who really want to perform serious study of themselves, of God, of life, of the universe, of understanding profoundly things. And that's why we don't take it lightly. It is here because people need to see what's at the end of the rainbow, but then getting to the end of the rainbow, it takes a time and a method. So Kashmiri Shaivism, I would say, just to finalize this question, because it says, in what ways does Kashmiri Shaivism offer a fresh perspective? It's not a fresh perspective. Kashmiri Shaivism simply takes you directly to the truth, to the reality, barren of like, let's not beat around the bush. Let's just go directly to what things are and how they are. This reality is so different from what we think we are and from what we think that life is, that for most people it's a bit of a shock. Like, really? I don't know if I ever heard that in any spirituality or something. And that's why it offers a fresh perspective, in the meaning that it is a teaching created by spiritual masters with a very, very good Ajna chakra and crown chakra. And those people cut directly to the bone of the matter. Like, there is no artifices, no stories. In Christianity, many people object that it's a religion made for illiterate people. And of course, love is always okay because even stupid people can be very loving and very wonderful people. And then you don't rely on people's education. You don't rely on people's understanding of metaphysics. You don't rely on people's diligence and willpower and self-discipline. You just rely on people's good character and goodness of temperament and love and all those. And because of that, and then the stories, many people object to Christian. Yeah, really, can you believe that God is an old, angry man with a long white beard who seemed to, at some point, to love the Jews more than anybody else? And then he changed his mind because they didn't like Jesus, and then other people like Jesus, and then they became the new chosen ones, and blah blah, and all this and all that. No, and I mean, people would consider that a Walt Disney theology, and it is a Walt Disney theology. It's like Jesus is close to Mickey Mouse in this way because it's like a legendary character, and a lot of stories are told, and some of those stories are very touching. If you want to speak about Saint Simeon the Stylite, which I don't know, when I say this, I don't know even among the students of Agama who knows who Saint Simeon the Stylite was, living in today's Lebanon or Syria or something. No, it's a saint who lived on a pillar, on top of a tall pillar, like living like a bird perched up on the tip of a stick. and living like you can't even imagine. You get dizzy only by thinking about it. And this guy lived there for 40 years. And like, why? And is this just some circus? Is this just some macho showing of your own strength, or what is it? So, of course, there are stories like the story of Simon the Stylite, which are touching you. And then people say, oh my God, I never heard that there was a saint who did that. And then you go on Wikipedia and read about it, at least the facts, the historical facts, and all that. And then there is a lot of metaphysics, which is theology, which is bullshit, and which people say, come on, man, this stories of the Jews and of the Christians and of the Muslims and about all these angels and archangels and an old man with a white beard who seems to be omnipotent, but actually sometimes seems to be very stupid and forgetful. And no, it's like it's so weird and all that. So Kashmiri Shaivism is definitely not going in this Walt Disney direction, and it's giving you a totally different. So it's not a fresh perspective, it's a straight perspective on things. How does Kashmiri Shaivism view the concept of God or the ultimate reality? Does Christianity have something similar? In an interesting way, high traditions from Jewish Kabbalah and from the Christian Gnosticism, the esoteric parts of Judaism and Christianity, as well as later some mysticism from the Sufism. So the mystical parts from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they do have some concepts which come pretty close. Kabbalistic Judaism mentions that the nature of God is triadic, that there are three aspects of God at the top of the ladder. In Christianity, God is again brought as a triad. God is one, but at the same time, God needs to make himself into three, which are called the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And there's a whole Mickey Mouse, a whole Walt Disney theology about those. But on the other hand, this triadic distinction is very, very close to Kashmiri Shaivism, and it corresponds perfectly well. So in this way, when you say that does Christianity have something similar, or how is the concept of God, I'm saying again, people like Abhinavagupta and Kshemaraja, they spend so much time in samadhi that they are actually telling us a sort of unfiltered truth. They simply say, when you sit there and you are in that state, that's how it looks. You understand it, I'm happy. You don't understand it, I'm still happy. It's like things are what they are. And in this way, how does Kashmir Shaivism view the concept of God? This is exactly the million-dollar question, because in the old days, Kashmiri Shaivism is coming as an anthropological root, as a theological root. It is coming as a product of Hinduism. It's part of the great current of Hinduism. And in Hinduism, God is not presented like one, but it's presented like a triad of forces, a spirit which is divided into three. And those three are called Trimurti, and they are the famous Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, the three faces of God, the three facets of God. And then this concept becomes enriched by Hindu Tantrism, in which those three are given a Shakti, each one of them. So in this way, it's not three up there, but it's six up there. It's Brahma with Sarasvati, it's Vishnu with Lakshmi, and it's Shiva with Parvati. In the most classical formulation, there are many, many sub-traditions and sub-streams in the village theology throughout India, which is a subcontinent, and it has many, many alternatives. And this is how the Vedas are written. This is how the Upanishads are written. That's the level of their spiritual understanding. And then different currents of thinking, they realized that dividing the Spirit of God into three, while very useful for the understanding, because we can understand that there is a part of God which creates and can be called the creator of all, of everything, including mine. He is my creator. But if there is a creator, then there is one which finishes the job as well and which does the destruction. One creates, one destroys. Then I understand it's like the left hand of God and the right hand of God. God is doing something with one hand and doing something else with the other hand. And those are a complex thing. And in this way, they have started transfiguring those three by telling us that Brahma, the creator, can be considered he himself as being an image of God. And then instead of Brahma, we call him Brahman or Para Brahma. And therefore I take the three top leaders, top images of God, and I take one of them, Brahma, and put it like on top of a pyramid, on top of the other three. He is among them, and at the same time, he also represents something higher. Then the worshippers of Vishnu, they would get upset and they would say, no, that's not good enough for us. For us, Vishnu is God, and if we are to transfigure one of them and make them God, then that will be, and they called that one Mahavishnu. There is a big Vishnu, transcendental Vishnu, which they choose to call Mahavishnu, and that would be God. And then, of course, the Shaivas, they come with their own version, and they say, no. For us, you think, who takes the whole thing out of manifestation and finishes the whole thing? So in the end, there is only spirit. Shiva. So out of those three, only Shiva really deserves to be connected to the next level, and therefore the image which is up there should not be an image of Brahma called Brahman, should not be an image of Vishnu called Mahavishnu. It should be an image of Shiva, which should be called Paramashiva or Anuttara or Bhairava or something like that. And then, so in this way, there appears a huge difference, because as the metaphysical traditions of India have evolved, the concept of God has evolved. 4,000 years ago, people were satisfied with this. God cannot be understood as one, but once we divide him in three, we can understand him. Then there was the tantric tradition, which simply said, you know what? If we cut God in another way, not like this, but like this, we can even divide him in two. And then it's the yang and the yin, the purusha and the prakriti. And then we can still understand him, because we understand the relationship. If we have two things or three things, then we understand the relationship between them, and we can make an endless amount of stories, as demonstrated in Taoism, where after they discovered conceptually the yin and the yang, then the yin and the yang combine themselves 3 times each, and the result, the trigrams, the 8 trigrams, and from the 8 trigrams combined with the other 8 trigrams, the result, the 64 hexagrams, which is one of the most seminal texts of Taoism, which is called I Ching, the Book of Transformations, in which basically the whole evolution of the universe is described through 64 forms, which are 2 at the potency number 6. 2 at the first potency is 2, 2 at the second potency is 4, 2 at the third potency is 8, and then if you go on like this, when you get to 2 at the sixth potency, it's 64. And 64 are the possibilities of this universe, only when you think about the universe as 2. If you say, what about the three? No, 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 no. You destroy the book of transformations with that. Then that's another book of transformation which should have been written in India, but nobody wrote it. How to describe the universe in threes, and Kashmiri Shaivism comes close to this triadic way of thinking. And therefore, you can describe the divine nature as three, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. You can describe the divine nature as two, Shiva, Shakti, Purusha and Prakriti, but you have to give it some numbers. And in the moment when God becomes one, then you cannot say anything about that one, because it's not bigger or smaller, brighter or darker, better or worse. It has no comparison, because in the moment when it's one, by the definition of the Greek philosophy, when there is only one thing there, that thing is called the absolute. It's absolute because it cannot be relative to anything else. And thus, Kashmiri Shaivism, because the original question, if you remember, was how does Kashmiri Shaivism view the concept of God? Kashmiri Shaivism shows you that God is absolute and it's one. And it does this through the connection of Shiva, because they belong to the Shaiva traditions of India. And at the same time, it shows you that God is multiple and relative, and God can be three, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, that God can be two, Purusha and Prakriti, that God can be five, because Bhairava can have a five-fold activity, and so many. Then God can be divided in 36 tattvas, and a lot of things are there. So Kashmiri Shaivism is the most complete view of God, which evolves all these incomplete views from the Vedas, from Vedanta, from Hinduism, from the different branches. They can all be brought to oneness by understanding Kashmiri Shaivism. So when it comes to Christianity, because the question was if Christianity has something similar, we can say similar, but not at all close in theology or metaphysics, because Kashmiri Shaivism has gone philosophically much further and much deeper into this. Christianity, Kabbalah, and others, intuitively, they have a description of the triadic nature of God, which is good enough for what their purpose was. What are some key texts or scriptures that are important in Kashmiri Shaivism? How can we study them? An interesting phenomenon has happened. Most of the texts, many of the fundamental texts of Kashmiri Shaivism are still, even today, not translated. Recently, a great Sanskritologist just finished translating one of the texts which waited for more than 60 years since the beginning of solid Sanskritology to be translated, and that would be the Tantra Loka, and written by Abhinavagupta himself. But still many, even today, like Malini Vijaya Tantras, Vakchandra Tantra, and others, they are not yet translated. They exist only in the Sanskrit original editions, and to read the Yoga Sanskrit, the Tantra Sanskrit, is almost impossible for normal mortals, because it's a Sanskrit which is super complicated. Even Sanskritologists disagree on the meanings of some words or symbols or metaphors in there. So to make the long story short, the funny thing was that around 1950s, 60s, some Sanskritologists from Italy, from France, and later on catching up with them, Austria, Germany, England, and United States, they have started looking into Kashmiri Shaivism. They discovered it, although it was in a corner of India there, almost forgotten, very, very buried under a lot of little things. And they discovered it, and each one of them, as soon as they translated a page or 1,000 pages from those, each one of them said, whoa, this is by far the most amazing level of Sanskrit metaphysics that we have ever seen. And therefore, because these people were scientists, scholars, first time people said, yeah, sure, it means you have some personal preference. But then another important person said, and another important person said, and another eminent Sanskritologist said. And then the world of Sanskritologists starting saying, like, there must be something. Because they are not all of them sectarian fanatics who, while working on this, they also got converted to it. And now they do proselytism, they do advertising for their own sect or something. There must be something to it. And they studied more and more. And thus, in the world of scholarship and Sanskrit, it is known that if you want to go to the top Sanskrit, to the top metaphysics, you should study Kashmiri Shaivism. And this made that actually a disproportionate number of scholars paid attention after the 1960s, and they said, wow, you know what, we should look a little bit into this. The result was disappointing because many of them did not have the mystical experience to deal with these things. They did not understand what Kundalini is. They did not understand what the chakras are. They did not have the proper states of consciousness experiences to be able to say, oh, this is that experience. I know what this is talking about. And therefore, they did a very dry and theoretical interpretation of these things. And that's why in Kashmiri Shaivism, starting with the 1960s and continuing through the 80s and even around the year 2000, there have been Sanskritologists, minor and major, who have translated, and a list of texts, it's always possible. The problem is that those people are not gurus, and those of them who are really honest, they say it, they acknowledge it, they say, look, I am a Sanskritologist, which makes me a scholar, but I'm not a guru. So don't ask me to do a transmission like Abhinavagupta mentions in his chapter, I don't know which, 31 or something. No, because that's what Abhinavagupta can do. I can just explain to you the scholarship, the Sanskritology, the text. But it's one thing to read about the chakras, and it's another thing to have a colossal Vishuddha chakra by which you can perform amazing feats, like Jesus materializing bread and fish for thousands of people. No, this is a totally different story. And thus, what I'm trying to say here is that we can easily give you a list of texts, and there is a bibliography in Agama, and that bibliography slowly even increases. As I told you, this year some new text has been published. Some apocryphal Sanskrit editors from India, they also try to do some work on this, and it's usually very, very low quality, unfortunately. And therefore, there are texts, you can have a list, you can study them, but without studying them in association with the chakras, with the energy, with yoga, with the actual practice, then you are filling up your head with a lot of philosophy, but it becomes an armchair philosophy. So we recommend to people to study. We have a study group, but even in the study group which we have here in Agama, we are telling to people to study in a yogic way, in a practical way, because we are not intending for people to have intellectual and Sanskritological studies. So the most important text historically is the Shiva Sutra, because that's the text which started the whole caboodle. But when they started this, they already had texts which were even older than the Shiva Sutra. So Shiva Sutra simply said, now we are going to look at things from this perspective. And then the other texts, Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, Rudrayamala Tantra, Malini Vijaya Tantra, Paratrimshika Tantra, Netra Tantra, Svakchandra Tantra, and others, they were there already because they have not been written after the Shiva Sutra. When Abhinavagupta comments on Malini Vijaya Tantra, it's like Malini Vijaya Tantra is way older than Shiva Sutra, but none of them knows where it comes from. Or the question is then, if there is in India a Malini Vijaya Tantra older than the Shiva Sutra, then why doesn't this Malini Vijaya Tantra exist in all the rest of India? Where did it get hidden, and where is it today for the people from West India, South India, and all that? So there is a lot of mystery in those things. But yes, there are approximately 10 key texts, and always in our study groups here, I recommend to people, according to the advice of Abhinavagupta, I'm not smart enough to give you advice on all the literary tradition of Kashmiri Shaivism, but Abhinavagupta is, and he does give this. And for example, Abhinavagupta says you should start always your studies with Paramarthasara, a text of 100 shlokas where they are given a lot of fundamentals of it. That's why people who do study groups, they have a workshop there about Paramarthasara, some 15 days or 20 days of study of Paramarthasara. Then there is a text by Kshemaraja, the Pratyabhijna Hridaya. Then there are others and others. Some of these texts are studied in the advanced teachings here in Agama. Some of them are studied in the study group. All in all, I would say that there are approximately 10 texts in which you want to look. And from the standpoint of practice, one of the most important and definitely the most rich of them is the text called the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, because in the Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, they are giving us 112 methods of meditation, each one of them reaching to the state of samadhi. There are other meditations which are not meant to go to samadhi, as Patanjali describes them, meditations meant to go to siddhis, to different paranormal accomplishments by the state of samyama. But in Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, there are 112 meditations, all of them meant to reach to the state of samadhi or nirvana. So, yes, we know the texts very well, and there is study of them gradually, step by step here in Agama. And again, lists can be given. You have a bibliography in the KS intro, and those of you who feel that you are intellectual enough to study on your own, you are very welcome to find those texts today with all this online culture. It's possible to find a lot of these texts on the internet in digital formats, and then take it from there. In the old days, you needed to have the book physically in your hands, and that limited the things much. How does Kashmiri Shaivism explain the relationship between the individual and the Supreme Consciousness or Shiva? Does it differ from the traditional Hatha Yoga? The beautiful explanation in Kashmiri Shaivism is that it explains that Jiva, or the individual soul, is like a wave on the ocean, and the ocean is Shiva, and the wave is Jiva. If you will meditate before next week, I'm going to talk about it on Tuesday or Wednesday when I talk about monism and this view of Kashmiri Shaivism in detail. You can meditate on what's the difference between a wave and an ocean, what is the difference between them, and what is the resemblance between them. What's common between the wave on the ocean, and what's different, if anything, between the wave and the ocean. And in this way, the jiva, the individual soul, is considered to be an offspring, an offshoot of the Supreme Consciousness. How can beginners start exploring Kashmiri Shaivist teachings and practicing in their own spiritual journey? I think personally, and of course, it's my implicit arrogance as a teacher, because if I wouldn't think this, then I wouldn't do it, or I would change what I'm doing. But I think that our Kashmir Shaivism intro is an excellent start on the path of Kashmiri Shaivism, because it puts you right on the track and it tells you what is what and what is not what, and which directions to go and which directions not to go into. For example, Kashmiri Shaivism has never been used for healing. There is no dimension. You are trying to heal yourself from a sore back. I can do chiropractic if you are interested. But Kashmiri Shaivism has nothing to do with your sore back. So that's why you have to know exactly the limits, the norms of these things. And I think our introduction is excellent for giving this clarity. If people want to study Kashmiri Shaivism in Agama, with me, with our study group here, then that's wonderful. And I have the satisfaction to see that many people get deeper and deeper and they understand more and more. If not, at least I can promise that after a workshop like this, people will get the clarity to study as well in other schools with other teachers, always keeping in mind what they have learned in their first 2 weeks of Kashmiri Shaivism here in Agama, because it's like it sets you on the right track. How can the profound teachings of Kashmiri Shaivism help us navigate the complexities of modern life? I remember when I was teaching decades ago in Denmark, I was teaching this to a small group of students, and later on, there was one of these students who got very focused and very efficient in business, very much involved in daily life, became a family man, and all that. And I asked him, how did you get from all the years of yoga and tantra and Kashmir Shaivism and this, how did the things work for you? And he said, very intelligent, again, very pragmatical, very smart person, well educated with a university degree and all that. And he said it very clearly. He said, I have never encountered anything as perfect and as profitable for me as Kashmiri Shaivism, which also allowed me to live in the 20th century and to do the things of the 20th century, and at the same time to preserve a spiritual integration. That's why I think that Kashmiri Shaivism, being a tantric discipline and being a discipline of oneness, is one of the best integrations of the world with the spirit of the reality of the, as it said here, the complexities of modern life. There are many aspects of yoga which are medieval. You can understand that some yogis living in the Himalaya in the 14th century, they were doing this and they were doing that. And then many people say, man, I'm not living in a Himalayan hermitage. I'm in the 21st century living with computers and all that. I'm not living in a cave like some Babas from India in the 14th century. How can I bring that yoga to today? I think, again, Kashmiri Shaivism is splendid in this way. Even in the KS intro, I give some quotes from Jagdish Chandra Chatterjee, who says, it's like in Kashmir, 6 months per year there was winter, and they were just sitting in front of the window and looking at the snowflakes coming from up, and this was their yoga. Well, when you discover the yoga of the snowflakes, then life becomes very different. No, then you don't have to live in a cave in the Himalayas. Then you can live in a house, and even watching television or going and surfing on the internet can bring you a lot of knowledge. And the last question in this long list, which I had sent here, is what insights from Kashmiri Shaivism can help us cultivate more meaningful relationships and connections? I guess the ones who sent this, they want to make fun of me because we have a little folklore here in Agama in which I'm often getting perplexed by relationship questions because we are a tantric school, and for people a huge source of challenge and at the same time of suffering is in their relationships. And of course it's meant to be like this because relationships are supposed to bake your noodle completely, and that's why it's a fast way of evolution. But then on the other hand, sometimes for me personally, having reached at the age where I am, I'm sometimes like, take it easy with all this. And now the question is, Kashmiri Shaivism has any inflection there, has any reflection on that subject? And of course it does at the deepest metaphysical thing, because it explains us what is God, what are we, what is the universe, and then automatically it explains to us how we relate to each other, how we relate to the manifestation, that if I am Shiva and you are Shiva, then what's the relationship between I and you from this perspective? And therefore, it preaches a level of love which the great Vivekananda of India, my namesake, who lived more than 100 years ago, he was calling it in one of his books, he was calling it para bhakti, not bhakti like you should be from the heart and in a loving perspective, but para bhakti, like there is a meaning of this love, which is not a sugar-coated emotion, but which is based on the fundamental truth of oneness. In the same way, Kashmiri Shaivism, studying the implications of oneness, then they start from the idea, if I am Shiva and you are Shiva, then what's the relationship supposed to be between you and I? But remember, this does not have a simple answer, because if you say I am Shiva, then you can also say Adolf Hitler is Shiva. So what's your relationship with Adolf Hitler or with Joseph Stalin or with somebody who pisses you off at the maximum? Take the maximum piss off person in your life and tell that person, called Walter, is Shiva, just as I am Shiva. So what is Shiva trying to tell to Shiva through that? Then what's the relationship? Am I allowed to dislike? Can Shiva dislike Shiva? Can Shiva hate Shiva? If Adolf Hitler is coming with a machine gun towards me, am I allowed to shoot him in the head to rid the world of his presence? But he is Shiva. But on the other hand, there is self-defense. On the other hand, there is ecology. On the other hand, you are supposed to kill the animals which are endangering the ecosystem. If there is a tiger or a lion which has killed 10 people in a village, then the villagers kill that lion or tiger because it's become a man-eater and it's a menace, and it will kill children and animals indiscriminately. And thus what I'm trying to say is the relationship is very complex, because I'm not trying to say that if I'm Shiva and you are Shiva, this means you are I and I have to love you and like you. Maybe you are a dangerous lion which needs to be put down for the health of a village, although you are Shiva. And therefore, here, the thinking, the ramifications of this are much more complex, but the idea is the vision, to be able to have the vision of what is happening. And indeed, that is very profound. So yes, surely the people who think in the way of Abhinavagupta, they have a special perspective on who we are, what we do in this world, how do we interact with God, how we interact with the universe, and how we interact with other human beings as well. Did any question emerge while I was talking? Is there anything that you want to point to or go into? Please, if you get a microphone, you can.
Just if you can give us a little bit of the history of Kashmiri Shaivism. So when did it start? Who started it, and how did it develop? Like,
As I said, the texts like Vijnana Bhairava and others, they existed before. Because nobody says that after Vasugupta got the Shiva Sutra in the 8th century, then suddenly they got the Malini Vijaya, the Svakchandra, the Vijnana Bhairava, and all that. No, they were there, and Abhinavagupta talks with reverence about them as they are older than history. So they come from somewhere else. But they were not integrated in this particular way with this particular vision which Kashmiri Shaivism has. And that's why Kashmiri Shaivism formally appeared in the 8th century. Until the 8th century, there were roots and threads of that tradition, but they were not called Kashmiri Shaivism, and they were not weaved in this particular compound. And it existed strong until the 12th century. So it had a story of 4 or 5 centuries, from the 8th to the 12th century. In the 12th century, Kashmir was converted to Islam due to the history of the Mongol Empire and the Mongols conquering all the Central Asia. And the wave of that eventually reached to Kashmir, and Central Asia was given in the dominion of the Islamic dynasties, which invaded even India. Even India between the 12th century and the 18th century was ruled by Islamic rulers. And because of that, Kashmiri Shaivism became, I would not say underground, but it became completely secondary. It became marginalized, even in Kashmir. Like in 1990, so we're talking about modern times, in Kashmir, I forgot, but I think if I say it correctly, the percentage of the Hindu people who were part of the Kashmiri Shaivism was like 7% of the population of Kashmir, and 93% of the population of Kashmir was Muslim, Islamic. And therefore, you can imagine that in this way Kashmiri Shaivism existed. It was there, but it was just a very marginal thing somewhere on the fringe of the Kashmirian society. And the only explanation which scholars have about it is that it was too good for the regular population. The regular population could relate to Islam, which is a religion for the masses, but Kashmiri Shaivism was something different. So it's shown in Kashmir, it's still called Kashmiri Shaivism. It's shown for 4 or 5 centuries between the 8th and the 12th century. After the 12th century, it became a shadow, marginal process. And in the 1950s, 60s, it was rediscovered by Western Sanskritologists who immediately announced the whole world of scholarship, guys, you are about to witness the disappearance of a tradition which is amazing, which is outstanding, which is, so don't let it disappear. And then a lot of Sanskritologists disproportionately focused on Kashmiri Shaivism, more like wow. But unfortunately, this did not bring the practice back. The practice of Kashmiri Shaivism was very little in the 1940s, and it is still very little in 2024. Here and there, a few enlightened beings are teaching about Kashmiri Shaivism in a practical, direct way. Good. I think we talked enough. You want to ask? Microphone?
About the name, we also can call, in your opinion, because I see that is related, it is named like this, Kashmir Shaivism, Trika Shaivism.
Yes. Trika is a Sanskrit name, which is one of the names, one of the most proeminent names of Kashmiri Shaivism. And it's a very beautiful name because Trika means a triad. And it means that in this way of thinking, everything is divided in three. So this is very meaningful. We comment about it. We explicitate it in the workshop. Why? What means a triadic way of thinking?
Can I ask one more question?
Please, please.
So did I understand right that this limitation of most of the people why they couldn't practice Kashmir Shaivism is something that appeared in Kali Yuga?
Yeah, well, Kashmiri Shaivism was born in the 8th century in India, so that was Kali Yuga already.
Mm. Yes.
But among the many teachings of Kali Yuga, this one is like a diamond. It's like, you have different precious stones, and some of them are more like diamonds, and some of them are more like inferior precious stones or semi-precious. This one is a diamond. Still, it's a diamond of Kali Yuga, but it's some of the best thing which Kali Yuga has produced in India and Tibet. Anyway, thank you all for joining. This was a beautiful reminder of some of the big subjects of Kashmiri Shaivism. I hope I'll see you Monday, and there we'll go step by step into these things, and I will show you, because at the same time, I don't just want to talk to you about this. After I talk about these things 2 days or 3, we have to start practicing, see what can be practiced about those things. Enough for tonight. Thank you all for joining. See you in the coming days.